Okay, what I want to talk about today is wood carving. So what you'll see in front of you is sort of what we call a sequence. And what we're going to carve today is an American eagle. It's going to be sort of a very simple eagle. I found this design a couple of years ago in a Wood Carving Illustrated magazine, and it seemed like the perfect type of project to do at demonstrations. It takes about a half hour to carve and paint it, and it makes something to be very nice to just sort of, with a crowd, especially find like a young person and really interested in wood carving, to be able at the end to just sort of give it to them as a giveaway project. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about tools. The main tools for wood carving is you've got to have a knife. So in this project, we're just going to use a regular sort of wood carving knife. Because we've got some small details, we'll also put in sort of a smaller blade. I mean, you could use an X-Acto knife. This one's called a detail knife. But then to get into other different shapes, we'll also put in a tool called a gouge, which will cut sort of a little bit of a curved shape, as well as one that has sort of a V shape to it. Little talk on safety here. These tools have to be razor sharp in order to work, which means if they're razor sharp, they cut through the wood real nice, but they can also cut you pretty good. So the whole time you're carving, the hand that's holding the project is going to be wearing a safety glove. This is just intended if you slip, you don't actually cut yourself too badly. If you're working on a table, usually if you slip, you might hit the table. A lot of times you're carving and you're sort of working on your lap. That's when something like a leather apron or something over the top sort of helps out in there. So this particular project started out with just a simple pattern. In this case, cardboard. This is the shape of it. It was transferred onto a piece of wood. We call it sort of a cutout, and then cut into this shape. Now this project can be done a couple of different ways. Notice this one, the block is a 1/2 inch thick. This one, we'd carve it actually on one side, and then we'd carve it on the other side, put a screw eye in the top of it after it's all done, and this could be something like a Christmas ornament you had to hang on a tree somewhere. Another option is to take the same blank, cut it about 3/8 of an inch thick, which these are, go on the back of it, drill a hole, put a magnet on it. You've got a refrigerator magnet. Another option, carve the piece, start about 1/4 of an inch thick, carve it just on one side, put a pin back on it, and you've got a pin. But pretty much whenever we start, we try to start with the cutout. You can see in here it's indicating the direction of the grain. It's got the major features of it, and that's where we're going to start. The first cut is going to be done with a knife, and you can see in the second step of the sequence, when you compare it to the first, you're going to see a few cuts have been done. You got to watch the grain. The grain is which direction. I put an arrow in here showing it, because just like a splitting maul will split the wood, if you cut the wrong direction with your knife, you're going to split it and you're going to take pieces off. So in this case, where I decided to start was just by rounding a little bit. So watching the arrow, and when you see up here, we can't go this direction, the arrow's pointing up, so I have to cut this direction in order to round the top part of the back of the head. When we're down here, we have to carve this direction to round that. Now we're going to work under the chin a little bit. And in here you can see we also want it to round a little bit this way. So in here, once again, we're at the bottom. We have to watch which direction we're carving. We'll carve this way. When we're in here, we need to carve this way, and then we hit somewhere in the middle. The beak would be the next cut. We want to sort of separate the beak from where the forehead is. So we do what's called a stop cut, where we just cut in, and then we start shaping the beak itself. And when you're shaping the beak, remember a beak on an eagle is going to angle downwards as well as come pointy towards the front. Now on this one, I carve about 3/4 of the way through, because this is going to be more like a refrigerator magnet. And again, if you were doing a 3D, you'd carve to about where the middle is, because you'd be carving the same feature again on the back side. So that's sort of the first step. You can start to see it starting to take a little bit of shape. The next step, we're going to start refining, and this is sort of the hardest part. The main feature on an eagle that really makes it look like an eagle is when you look at it, you can see sort of this mean look to it, and you can see this heavy eyebrow that sort of sits over the top of it. So to do this cut, we start where we left off before, and this time we're going to have to start by carving in this way to get that sharp eyebrow sort of look in here. But then we want to have the brow itself, the eye down a little bit, and then finally get down in the body. So this cut's going to take 3 times. The first cut is using the line we had. You just sort of cut straight in along the line. Then, probably using the gouge, if you sort of carve a little bit and you're getting down to this level where the eyeball is. So we've sort of cleared out into that direction. Of course, when you do that, the line goes off where the eye's supposed to be. So you take your pencil, you put the eyeball back in. Then, a knife like this is kind of big for doing details, so we use a smaller blade and we just sort of cut around the shape of the eye. Once we've cut in and defined it, then we take the gouge again, we cut this direction, and we release all the wood. So you end up with 3 layers, sort of the layer where the eyebrow is, then the eye, and then finally where the body is. In the end, you look at where the beak is, you look at where all the features are, you take between your knife, your gouge, and you start working it and sort of try and blend all those pieces together. One other thing you want to watch on these birds is the eye wants to look forward. So if you look really closely at it, instead of just being flat, you'll see that this actually was cut at an angle, so it's angling a little bit towards the front. And again, now it's just sort of time to clean things up, and we'll move on to sort of the final, well, last to the final step almost. In here, we've just started adding feather details. We start out by cutting around the beak a little bit. You can see where we now have the upper beak to the lower beak. This has been rounded. We cleaned up all these areas in here. And then to put the feather texture, it's kind of a combination of you start cutting straight lines with a V-gouge, which you could also do with a knife. You start putting curves in sort of in here, and you want that flow of the feathers to sort of go downwards. The final step is to sort of break this edge in along in here, and that's done with just a series of sort of small V cuts where you cut in this way, and you can see how it adds that sort of texture down to where the neck area is. One other thing I did in here is just to show where the eyeball is. I sort of used the center punch and sort of turned it and pushed it in a little bit to define where the eyeball is. When you're done with that, you've basically got the shape of your head, and you're ready for sort of the final step. Final step's going to be painting. It's good to have reference pictures so you can get an idea what color is the beak supposed to be, what color is this supposed to be, what color are the eyes supposed to be. So in that case, what I like to do on these is I put a little screw or a sheetrock screw in the back so I can hold on to it, and then I always start with the lightest colors first. So I painted the white, and one thing on the white, don't use like pure white. If you use sort of more of an off-white, it looks a little bit nicer. The beak itself is kind of an odd shade of yellow, so sometimes you might have to start mixing a few colors together to get a color that you like. The eyeballs, actually, when you look at it, are sort of a strange light greenish. So I mixed a little bit of green and some yellow together, painted around the eyeball, then put the black pupil in, and pretty much you're finished with your paint job. One thing when I paint these, if you look at the back, you see I also sort of break the back edges before I paint, and that way I bring the paint around the edge, and that makes it sort of a three-dimensional look. Once that's done, let it dry, spray it, and you've got yourself a nice eagle head, either pin, ornament, or refrigerator magnet. So, this will probably keep Fanny happy. At least now, she can hang that Declaration of Independence that Ethan brought home from the refrigerator and quit having it fall on the floor. Cut!